Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the new year, new world, we hope, with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
One of the saddest of the features of what has happened to the great Arab civilization in Syria is the brain drain, with surgeons and scientists taking to rubber inflatables to leave behind their ancient society, perhaps forever.
Dr. Ahmed Khaddour is the antidote to that. As a Syrian surgeon, he lives and works in Damascus and pops over here for a few weeks at a time to keep his hand in at the NHS, and refuelled goes back to Syria to brave the bullets and the bombs.
I must say, Doctor, in welcoming you back on board the Sputnik, I cannot hide my admiration and respect for a man who could easily be living in London and working in the NHS, have a safe and good life, but who nonetheless has clung through all of this carnage over the last almost 5 years now. So that out of the way, tell us how things are for you and your family and the millions of people who are living in Syria through this hell.
First of all, I would like to thank you both very much for this opportunity again. I have to say I'm honored to be on your show again. And much of a greeting from all my colleagues to you, to my friends here in UK. It's been, to be honest with you, is a nightmare to live in this situation in Syria. Every day you can hear bombing or suicide bombing, killing 20, 30 people. Eastern part of Damascus, on daily basis being hit by 20, 30 mortars from the suburb of Damascus, where the rebels hold the area and holding too many civilians, and the army could not advance to liberate this area because a lot of civilians sieged in these areas. At the top of that, the economy crisis is getting worse. The currency, Syrian currency, losing its value. Before the crisis, when US dollar was worth 50 Syrian pound, now it's about 400. The salary did not increase to such extent, so everybody is struggling to get the basic for his family. So it's not easy life, I have to say. Now we're living in dark days, I have to say.
And what's the morale of the people in all of this?
Well, people, they're desperate to find a solution. Desperate for this war to end by any way. This war claimed more than 300,000 deaths so far. I have to say million disabled and million displaced. So Syrian people, everybody is desperate for this to end. I'd love to see this ending by tomorrow. I have to say a lot of people, especially targeted minorities, they feel possibly it's a war for their existence in that area. That's why...
so Christian minorities, Alawite and so on.
Those,
they're basically got their backs to the wall.
Yeah, got back to the war, they feel, because their existence is in danger.
Syria was the very best place to be a Christian in the Arab world. I myself have visited many of the churches, cathedrals, monasteries, convents, and the pristine way in which all these places were preserved and kept, and the honor given to the Christian people, ancient, the first Christians, was something that no visitor, whatever their view of the government in Damascus, could deny. And of course, in Iraq, the Christian population has been decimated, more than decimated. Half of all the Christians in Iraq are no longer there. They're either dead or in headlong flight.
Yeah.
And yet the Christian politicians in the West, who are always telling us how Christian they are, appear unmoved by that. How does that feel to the Syrian Christians?
Well, I got too many Christian friends. They are very worried, and possibly more half of them who found an opportunity outside Syria, they moved already. Before this war started, we were living in harmony, all Syrian people. Nobody talked about religions or about I am Muslim, Sunni, or Alawi, or Druze, or Christian. Nobody talk about this. Everybody lives in harmony. But as soon as this problem started and this takfiri mentality enter our society, and this takfiri works, killing, kidnappings, targeting these minorities, this start to spark and this fear start to grow.
These Christian leaders, and they called themselves Christian leaders. I myself never considered they were acting on behalf of Christianity. Real Christians believe in the prophets, peace be upon them. They believed in the prophets and how to get a bigger piece of them. But of course, most of the people in Syria, especially if you say half the Christians have already fled, are equally contemplating what life could possibly be like under ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the other extremist organizations. I know Syria very well. I know the Syrian people very well. They could never live under this kind of ruler. The idea of these black flags flying in Damascus, that really is a nightmare.
Well, I think one of the goals of this war is to distort the picture of Islam. They wanted to give a picture of the Islam is equal to extremism, murder, as I said, beheaded people. So that's not a real picture of Islam. So one of the goals is to distort the picture of Islam. One of the goals of this picture. A lot of people who cannot tolerate living under these rules. Even Sunni people displaced to government area. They live in harmony so far. In the government control area in Latakia, you can see a lot of refugees moved from Raqqa, Idlib, Aleppo, and they moved still in harmony, normal life in Latakia, in Tartus, with their brothers, other Alawite or Christian, whatever. So, as I said to you, this war targeted the Syrian society very clever. They wanted to destroy the Islam instruction, real Islam instruction to live in harmony, in peace. So,
Doctor, I'm interested in to understand how a hospital functions during a war and under bombardment, under the continuous threat of terrorism. George spoke about the brain drain. Do you in your workplace experience the losses of doctors and nurses going away, and what is the substitute for that? Are there perhaps charities and NGOs that supply the WHO perhaps? How does that work?
Unfortunately, we're losing human resources on daily basis in my hospital. People wanted to live in peace, first of all. They wanted their basic life. So unfortunately, we're losing a lot of experts from my place and other places on daily basis. We managed to recruit replacements for these people. A lot of people, they don't want to move. They insist to stay.
Good.
They staying. We're trying to keep our health system united and working efficiently to some extent. I cannot compare it how it was and how it is at the current time. As I said, health system was very good before this crisis. As a result of this crisis, we got a lot of difficulties to do with lack of human resources, lack of equipment.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, medical supply.
Sanctions affected the health system very badly. The equipment which we could afford to pay it 4 years ago, now we could not afford to buy the same equipment. We have to find alternative, a cheaper one, to keep working efficiently.
Now the narrative from my side of the political argument over Syria often stresses the number of foreign invaders who are involved in this dirty war. And to be sure, there are tens of thousands of such foreigners. But I'm sorry to say that there are many Syrians involved in this dirty war also. And when it's over, and I do believe that the tide has turned, I do believe this is going to be a better new year for you than last New Year was. But you're going to have to come to terms with the fact that many tens of thousands of your own countrymen and women were murdered by their compatriots. Have you any vision of what a post-war Syria might look like in that regard?
Well, the Syrian government pushed for many reconciliation deals. Last one, I think, if you heard about in Homs, thousands of these armed people, they accepted just to leave their arms and leave. And some people would like to get integrated back to our home society, which has been done smoothly. I think the government is pushing for more reconciliation deals and amnesty as well, which has been acted for these people to find a door, a pathway, peaceful pathway to get integrated back to society, to rebuild this society again. So that's the only hope. If I think we need to get our society back, there should these people to convince us after 5 years of war we reach nothing. We have to be one society, one Syrian society, look for a future, look for peace, rebuild our society again, rebuild our future for our children.
Dr. Khaddour, you're always welcome when you're in London to join us here.
Thank you very much again for this opportunity, and thank you both. I'm very honored. Thank you. Bye.
Coming up next, one of London's brightest new novelists, Sauruv Dutt. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Sputnik. Domestic violence and violence against women exist within all communities, but within some, it's undercover.
Such is the shame that is, and indeed should, accompany the idea of men beating women. In some immigrant communities, it's usually shrouded in silence. Sauruv Dutt has lifted the veil in his latest novel, The Butterfly Room, and I'm glad to say he joins us now. Sauruv, you're a very hot young novelist. In the past, you've dealt with horror novels. Now you've segued into real-life horror. Although it's a novel, it's only a novel because people couldn't give you their names and chapter and verse for a kind of non-fiction work. Tell us what led you into this and what you discovered.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation today, George and Gayatri. Just to put this in context, the World Health Organization statistic came out a matter of days ago, which stated that during the lifetime of a woman, she will be a victim of domestic violence or sexual abuse, and that person she will be receiving it from will be a man. That just gives a scale of the gravity of this problem and this situation.
And what was the figure? 1 in 3?
1 in 3 women during their lifetime will experience abuse, either domestic violence abuse or sexual abuse. So it's really
staggering.
It really is staggering. What led me to this journey was initially an account of the true accounts of women who have suffered domestic violence and sexual abuse. and this was planned to be a non-fiction book. However, such is the taboo around this subject and the stigmatization that a lot of these ladies wish to remain anonymous. So rather than let this good work go to waste, I wanted to use their accounts and then put it into a novel form and to give back in a certain way, which is that sales from the book would go to domestic violence charities. But interestingly, I was approached beforehand by a lobby of men actually who felt that they were being stigmatized by women, and this was disproportionate. They were saying that, look, the problem isn't quite as bad as it's made out, whereas men are getting a bad rap. Why don't you write for us and regarding putting our case forward? Once I did some very basic research on this, I realized just how bad the problem really is for women, and I didn't want to blanket that in any shape or form. That's what led me to write this book.
Well, if there's 7 billion people in the world and half of them are female, and a third of those females will suffer either domestic abuse or sexual violence, or perhaps both, that's a phenomenal number of women. And if they're all, almost all, at the hands of men, it's a phenomenal number of male criminals.
But probably the men that are abusing are usually close to them, yeah? That's usually the shocking factor behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really troubling about all these statistics and these accounts is the number of unreported incidents. Yeah. It's particularly prevalent in some communities, in some societies and sectors. Just think about those who can't bring their cases for fear of stigmatization or taboos. And when you look at the totality of this problem, you've got to think about those who couldn't bring their cases.
Well, exactly.
Or where, for example, in some circles, a certain type of abuse, believe it or not, just doesn't merit a certain threshold. If it's psychological, for example, if the man is withholding funds and not allowing the woman to be financially independent, this doesn't, in some circles, count as domestic violence or abuse, yet it is just the preliminary stages of an actual assault, battery, or even worse.
Some will no doubt complacently imagine that a country like Britain does not have its fair share of these statistics, that it's not as common here as it might be in countries where the immigrant communities originally came from. Is that accurate?
Well, regarding this issue, I mean, in Britain, the problem is just as bad. Certain austerity cuts are stripping domestic violence charities and organisations of the funds and means to provide help and assistance to these women. It's not just immigrant communities. It doesn't matter whether it's Indian or Pakistani. It could be Eastern European. It could be British women, British citizens. It runs the spectrum and the gamut.
Although the taboo is more prevalent in some communities.
Absolutely. I mean, the genesis of the book was based on accounts in South Asia and India to start with, although it ran across interviews with women everywhere. But you're right. In Britain, a lot of the immigrant communities, first generation, second generation, third generation, the stigmatization has continued through generation, through class, through any spectrum of society. Sometimes there's a focus to say, oh, well, the women who are being abused come from a lower class or a lower income band. This isn't true whatsoever. In Britain, in fact, those who can be abused or stigmatized and suffer this sort of abuse can be CEOs, they can be lawyers, they can be doctors. They don't have to be spinsters or housewives.
As an anthropologist, I also conducted qualitative research, as you've done yourself, and I did mine amongst poor communities, and I know how difficult it is to enter these communities. So I wonder how it was for you as a man to get in touch with them and get the women to talk to you.
Well, the initial stages of my research came through some legal work, through legal aid.
As you may, your background.
Yeah, and as you may know, legal aid cuts have meant that a lot of women who have suffered domestic violence abuse simply cannot bring cases, whereas once they could have. Yes, you're correct. When I approached women initially, they were sceptical, to say the least, about why a man would be wanting to interview them, and that I would have certain preconceptions. But once it was clear where I was going with this book, the response has been phenomenal. I believe that as a man, it's part of my battle and struggle as well with regards to gender inequality. We see very often how brave women are given mediums and platforms to speak, and men they clap along and they provide assurances and promises, but they aren't putting action where words are being placed. Take, for example, India, just as a simple example. It's 3 years almost to the day, in a sense, where a horrible rape occurred in Delhi. A lot of promises were made, a lot of assurances, by men no less, of funds which would be released, money that would be raised, and they just haven't been followed through. So to just digress slightly from that, I can understand the scepticism towards men and what their motives are, but with me, I simply wanted to provide a voice, and I wanted to be one of the few men, unfortunately a minority, who does speak about this and does debate about this and does want to give a voice to the voiceless.
The double standards, of course, are brazen. There's a notorious case right now in Saudi Arabia where a Sri Lankan woman and a Sri Lankan man working in Saudi Arabia have been convicted of extramarital sexual relations. The man is to be lashed and the woman is to be stoned to death. This kind of brazen double standards would not be permitted here, but there are plenty of double standards of a lesser standard and commonplace. Men don't feel this pain in the way that women do.
Absolutely true. I mean, the stigmatization that comes across simply by a woman raising their concerns is horrifying. When a woman speaks out about this, for some reason she is vilified. She's not seen as an independent person voicing concern, rather a rabble-rouser, a troublemaker, someone who's trying to make an issue where there isn't one. Unfortunately, the issues are prevalent. They do need to be discussed. But yes, there is a double standard, because if a woman, particularly in countries such as India, countries such as Saudi Arabia or elsewhere, raise their voices, they are ostracized. Their voices are pushed to the side and attempted to be made as minuscule as possible. Why is this? We have to get beyond this. We're in 2016 now. We're looking at a point where we must debate these things out in the open, and it can't be on Independent Women's Day. I take a bit of umbrage with the day, International Women's Day. This is a day where everyone collates, and a lot of media echo chambers talk about how this is so important, and lots of money is raised, and the day after, the issue is forgotten.
Well, of course, you are yourself from South Asian background, Indian background, and there are millions of people in Britain today from that community. Half of them are men. What's their attitude to your novel, The Butterfly Room?
Well, the men themselves, again, they feel that whilst this is an issue that must be discussed, you can't say too much, which is kind of, it's ridiculous in itself. It's almost as if a certain level of criticism is permitted, but if you go beyond that, and if you try to dig deeper into the reasons and the rationale, they don't want to hear that. Whilst we are moving into generations that do want to hear more about these problems and issues and do something about it, unfortunately, certain prejudices and discriminatory attitudes are passed on from generation to generation.
People seeing their father beating their mother are far more likely to beat their own wives when they have one.
Yeah. This is a pattern that unfortunately is bearing to be true. It's the sins of the father being passed along, and if it's not physical, it comes across in another way. Like I said, it could be, for example, confiscating the credit card, confiscating any financial means of independence, where one is a breadwinner who earns a considerable amount in the city, for example, and insists that the woman remains at home. While she does remain at home, she has no independence of herself. And the argument is always brought back that, well, I'm the fee earner, I'm the breadwinner here, listen to me and listen to what you say and listen to what I say. And if you were to raise your voice, think about what others will think of you within the family. This is a very particular problem within the South Asian communities and immigrant communities. It's a concern about what others will think.
What they perceive, and
It's a fascinating novel, The Butterfly Room. It's being published not just in Britain, but internationally.
Yes.
How's it doing?
It's doing very well. It's come to the attention of MPs, figureheads and charities. Amnesty International UK, for example, picked up on the book. Several leaders, with Jeremy Corbyn, even Number 10, believe it or not, has a copy of the book. It's doing very well. It's going to be published in India present, which has been a bit of a difficult uphill struggle, actually, when it shouldn't have been. And it's
Because of the taboo.
just because of the taboo, just because of the criticism. Again, you're allowed to say a bit, but don't say too much. And importantly, I've bonded with several charities, major charities, who have taken part, Women's Aid, Refuge, and one in particular called the Sharon Project, who's a relatively new organisation helping women in this country, in the United Kingdom. And the praise has been unanimous so far, so I'm very thankful for that.
Well, excellent. It's a first-class read and a real eye-opener. Sauruv Dutt, thank you for joining us. Alas, that means on this new year, that's the end of the show.
But please stay in touch with us through Twitter at @RT_Sputnik or on Facebook, Sputnik on Russia Today. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous. Happy New Year.